So much. And yeah, it's really great to be with you at your Luck conference today. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Susanna, and the organising committee for this invitation to be here today. I'd like to first acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from unceded traditional lands of the Awabakal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to Awabakal elders past, present, and future. I'd like to start my presentation today by providing some background context into why I'm researching young people and news media. This research for me really began back in 2017 when I started noticing a lot of disparaging comments were being made about young people and media, particularly news media, by a range of influential actors and as part of conversations about the rise of fake news. And when I heard these claims, I was quite surprised because I wasn't aware of any studies from Australia that would provide any evidence to back up the things that were being said, which were basically claims or innuendo suggesting that young people get all their news passively from social media. They're not doing any fact checking, and so in this way they're responsible for this rise that we were all grappling with at the time and still are. So in this way, really, the suggestion being made was that young people were at fault. They were to blame for the rise of mis and disinformation. So hearing these claims really prompted me to start doing some research. And what I found is that there were no recent major studies at all that would back up these claims or support them in any way. Nothing at all for young people aged under 18. And, that seems strange to me, given it was a quite radical change in terms of the news practices of all of us, but particularly young people, as we were hearing. So this recognition of this research gap is what really started my research journey. It led to 2 funded research projects, several unfunded research projects, and 4 years later, I'm still doing research on young people and news media, working with a number of colleagues and industry partners who I'll acknowledge at the end of this presentation, but in particular working with Professor Michael Dejuani from the Digital Media Research Centre at Queensland University Technology. I've been working with him on all of these projects, so I want to acknowledge that collaboration. So as part of the research that we've been doing, we have hosted focus groups and workshops with young people. We surveyed more than 300 school teachers and we interviewed 20. We've analysed 1 day of the news in Australia, examining a sample of newspapers and television to look at how young people are included and represented in the news. And twice we've surveyed more than 1,000 young people, once in 2017 and then again last year in 2020. But also Michael and I are practice-based researchers, so we want also to be contributing to advancing media literacy in Australia. So to respond to our research findings along the way, we've done quite a few additional activities. Well, we've participated in dozens of media interviews to try and inject evidence into public discussions about young people and news. We've also co-designed research with 21 young people who are shown here and mentored them over a period of 1 year to help them to lead discussions about the future of news and about young people and news media. We've written submissions to several parliamentary inquiries to push for more media literacy support for young people. We've worked with ABC Education to support teachers who want to teach news in the classroom, and we've mapped opportunities for teaching news across the Australian curriculum to support teachers and organisations who are developing media literacy materials. We volunteered to provide advice and support to 5 new Australian news media literacy initiatives and 1 new global initiative. And finally, we've supported the inclusion of young people in a major news exhibition, which is currently showing at the Museum of Australian Democracy in Canberra. One of the most important things I've learned in all of this research and engagement around young people and news is that news plays an important role in the lives of most young people. Close to half of young Australians aged 8 to 16 years old agree or strongly agree that getting news is important to them. Slightly more teens felt this than, so the 13 to 16-year-olds than children, but there's not actually a big difference, just 4% really. 1/3 of young Australians, however, believe that news is not important to them. But still, even from that cohort, lots of those young people agree that news makes them feel smart or knowledgeable, so they still believe it has value for them. I want to play a short video now where the 21 news champions we work with explain why getting news is important to them and to other people. The video was taken at October 19 at the News Champions Forum, which we organised with ABC Education and the Museum of Australian Democracy. So I'll just play this video now.
Well, news is important for young Australians because it's how we interact with the world around us and gain a global awareness that's beyond just our school or local community.
News is important to young Australians as it prepares them for when they are adults, so they are informed citizens and can vote accordingly.
It's very important because it's a key connection with young Australians and the rest of the community. And it puts us together. It's a way of keeping together in contact with each other.
It gives young Australians a snapshot of the outside world and inspires them to seek and explore beyond their local community and to help others who are in need outside of just their country or their town.
News helps young Australians develop their own opinions separate from their families and from school, and helps us learn how society functions.
I think it's important to have not only a local but also a global consciousness to allow us to make informed decisions in the best interest of everyone.
I think news is really important because it helps you in mostly every aspect of life, whether it's finding a job, buying a property, or even travelling. So I think it's really important.
News is important for young Australians because we are able to win arguments against our parents that we like to do as teenagers. You need to go on the news to be able to win that argument, because my dad is a very good arguer, and so let's get all the info.
Well, I think as young Australians emerging into adult society, we need to be educated about the world to best contribute to the world.
When we asked young people in our national survey where they got their news from the day before the survey, the day before they completed it in 2020, family came out on top, followed by TV, a teacher, friends, and only then social media. So this finding directly rebukes many of the claims we hear about young people in news. It shows that social media is important for news engagement, but not as much as people often say it is or think it is. And I have to admit I was surprised how pivotal family were to news engagement in 2017, and this only increased in 2020, even though I think I probably shouldn't have been surprised. Family are of course still central to the lives of young people under 18, and this remains true today even though media engagement has become more fragmented and more individualised. For children, family are the most preferred source of news and the most trusted source as well. For teens, social media is the most preferred news source, but again, family are the most trusted. Neither teens nor children have high levels of trust for their friends as news sources, again rebuking the claims I was hearing back in 2017 and still hear today. But also young people don't have high levels of trust for news organisations either. They do very much trust their teachers and family to provide them with trustworthy news. And maybe we should have had added librarians here. We could do that in the next survey, though I suspect that the finding would be similar to the result for teachers, which is a high level of trust. So while social media is a significant source of news for young people, as I said, it's not as significant as many people seem to think. And certainly this spikes rapidly as children become teens and they start to use more social media sites and use them more frequently. For children, YouTube, Facebook and TikTok came out on top for getting news, even though this group are under the age of consent for at least one of those platforms. For teens, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube were on top, with Instagram growing the most, growing very significantly between the period 2017 and 2020. When we compare the results of our 2020 survey with those from 2017, we find that news media is being consumed more frequently and in more socially mediated ways. That is, more young people now receive news more often from their family, teachers and friends, but also online, especially through social media. And when we asked this question, we asked it in two different ways, but the results were the same either way, in terms of young people getting their news in a more socially mediated way. And so I think this socially mediated news engagement is a really interesting and important shift that I think should directly inform the way we teach media and information literacy. Because I think when news or information is socially mediated, there is an important moment of possibility. And at that very point where the news or information is being shared, I think something important can happen. There's a moment, in fact, where many things can happen. In that moment, young people are able to use news to mobilize others, to share their personal experience or their values, to counter or reject claims that are being made, to build connections with others, to take actions that may become the subject of future news stories. And to illustrate this, we can look at the very recent example of Chanel Contos, who, after hearing recent accounts of sexual assault in news media, opened up to her friends about her own experience of being sexually assaulted while at school by boys from elite schools in Sydney. Now, this led to her first doing an Instagram poll to allow her friends to share their experience, and that then emboldened her to then start a public online petition which was circulated widely via social media, and with so many contributions of school students telling about their own experience of sexual assault in schools in Australia. This led to significant attention, significant news attention, to responses from politicians and significant responses from school principals. So we are now seeing long overdue changes, all which really began from this online engagement, first with news and then with her friends on Instagram. So the challenge, I think, for all of us who are educators is how best do we integrate young people's diverse news and information engagement practices into media literacy education. This is challenging for so many reasons, but to start with just one, with a focus on news, what people might think of as news on Instagram can look very different to news on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok. On Instagram and TikTok, you can't just click through to the news story to check the source, to make an informed decision about whether the news really came from that source and to consider whether the source is reliable. You can't easily click through to verify claims as facts to see the full context of that news story, and that's because Instagram is designed to keep people inside Instagram. They don't want people to leave it. So instead, news and, of course, misinformation are passed on relationally. They're passed on through influencers, through friends or others who might personalize news, summarize it, counter it. And people need to make a different kind of decision about whether to trust news in that context, or to make a decision about whether they're going to actively decide to leave Instagram in order to go and do a bit of investigation and to verify that news or information before they believe it or before they pass it on to others. When Facebook banned news media for a week in February this year, for all of us located in Australia, there was lots of talk about the impact of that news ban and how it might increase the flow of mis and disinformation and also reduce traffic to news media websites. But I felt that something was missing from that conversation. When news is shared by people on social media, as I've mentioned, things can and do, important things can and do happen to that news. The person sharing the news, at the very least, is saying to their network, hey, I think this is worth your time. I'm asking you to engage with this news story or issue. But often people do far more than that. They may explain why they think the issue is important. They might add context to the story, including their lived experience or the lived experience of those that they know. Commenting around news is really powerful, and it can constitute a form of civic engagement. In fact, I would say it always constitutes a form of civic engagement if that news story is about a social or political issue. So when I heard friends and family saying, hey, I like Facebook better without news, long may it last, I thought, yeah, you know, okay, I get it, but we're losing more than news here. News engagement is a prerequisite for a great deal of civic engagement, because you need to know what's happening. You need to feel you know what's happening before you take part in many civic engagement activities. But also, often sharing news on social media can be, as I said, a form of civic engagement in itself. So if this news ban spread or does spread to other platforms, and news is already restricted in many ways across social media, I think this is a really bad thing for civic engagement. On top of this, the news people get via their social media networks may mean they engage with stories they otherwise would not have, while they get to hear the lived experience of news stories and events from those that they are connected with on social media. And when that happens, when news is connected to the lived experiences of those they know or that they feel connected to, news becomes more relevant. And in this way, it has more meaning for people. And I think it therefore becomes elevated in importance. Now, as I mentioned, we're already seeing social media platforms restrict news in different ways. While the Facebook threat to ban news or specific news media organisations is certainly not resolved, in fact, I would say the Australian government have now essentially agreed that Facebook hold that right as part of their negotiating power with news organisations. Instagram prevents people from including direct links to content and therefore the original source of news and information that's posted. There's many ways that social media is already restricting news. Algorithms are regularly changed in ways that alter how and when people see news in their feeds. And really, we know very little about how all of that impacts people's news sharing capabilities and practices. But also, I would say that schools that block young people from using social media also limit young people's ability to engage with news, and that impacts on young people in differential ways as well, depending, for example, on how much internet access they have when they're outside of school. News has always been socially mediated. Young people have, across generations, received news from family, teachers and friends, and they're still doing this. But since many new actors now create and deliver news, and they're delivering this via social media platforms, our ideas about news and information literacy need to change if they're going to stay relevant. And socially mediated news engagement, of course, comes with risks as well. Mis and disinformation can circulate widely and very rapidly on social media, as we all know. People may trust the wrong people to deliver them news. They may be less equipped and indeed less able to carry out actions that would support them to analyse and verify news and information. And this really matters because we know that mis and disinformation are often not being challenged by young Australians. These are results from our survey. In our survey, we asked young people if they know how to tell fake news stories from real news stories, and less than half felt that they were able to do that. And for those who are getting news regularly from social media, we asked how much attention they give to the source of news stories they find online. Almost half said they give very little or no attention at all to the source of those news stories. We also asked those getting news stories on social media, young people aged 8 to 16, if they take any actions that would help them to reduce the likelihood that they receive or believe misinformation. And we found that fewer than half of young Australians who get news from social media sites use any of the basic methods that we listed that would help them check the veracity, the quality of news media, and to minimise or respond to unreliable news sources, which sounds terrible. until you compare the findings with an adult survey carried out by researchers at the University of Canberra for the annual digital news report. So what you're seeing here in orange are our results for young people from our survey from 2020, and in blue you're seeing results for the same questions for an adult survey of Australian adults, which was carried out in 2019. So you can see here, in every instance, young people say they're doing way more than adults to check sources, to make conscious decisions about not trusting particular news sources and not sharing news that they suspect to be unreliable. Of course, what people say they do doesn't always match what they actually do, but I think that this remains a reality check. And in fact, these results are one of the reasons why I'm now focused on adult media literacy, because I believe this requires far more attention in Australia and beyond. Finally, we explored young people's news literacy education at school by asking the respondents about their critical engagement with news stories and the opportunities they've been afforded to create news stories in the classroom. Just 1 in 5 young Australians said they had a lesson during the past year to help them decide whether news stories are true and can be trusted in their classroom. And this result was exactly the same for children as it was for teens. And that result was unchanged from 2017. Even fewer young people, 28%, said they'd participated in lessons. That actually went down from 2017 to 2020 to help them to create their own news stories. So together, these findings suggest that overall news media literacy education has not increased in schools during 2017 to 2020 from the perspective of young people, contrary to our expectations, given the huge focus, the increased public focus on misinformation and disinformation during this period. I think news media literacy should be connected to broader media literacy education, and I think using a media literacy framework to design learning experiences can ensure that news media literacy is comprehensive. And Michael Dejuani and I have been working with the Australian Media Literacy Alliance, AMLA, to develop this framework, which we'll use as a key document as we begin a national media literacy co-design consultation process later this year with AMLA that aims to develop a national media literacy strategy. I believe that using a shared vision and framework can help us to ensure that media literacy education does what it needs to do for young people and for adults as well. It can also ensure that media literacy education can be properly evaluated, but I also think that a framework that provides people with a way to think, a transferable model that people can use to think critically about all of the media they consume, using a framework that allows people to think, I think then makes that learning transferable so that it's lifelong learning, and in the future they can use that same framework to analyse different types of media they interact with. To sum up, I would say that news is important to young Australians. Young people get news in multiple ways, but engagement via social media is growing and it is diversifying. And I should say that I think this research and these claims that I'm making about news in this presentation can also be applied more broadly to information, not just news. And I think, in fact, that the distinction between those two things is increasingly being blurred as well. I would also say that most young people are not taking enough steps to verify news, but neither are adults. Socially mediated news engagement, I think, provides important opportunities for civic engagement. Media literacy education can support young people to be confident and capable so that they can ask the right questions about newsworthiness and quality, but also so they can recognise and best utilise those moments of opportunity when news is being passed on relationally, whether as recognise those either as learning moments, learning opportunities, or as civic engagement opportunities. So just to conclude there, the research that I presented today came from these two projects in particular, and these papers, they're all listed on our website, which is the below link, Western Sydney/media literacy. Thanks very much again, and look forward to the rest of the day.